I am speaking with Bruce Tarr, our state senator and minority leader. Hi, Bruce. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Heather. Thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You do it every year, but tell us about the toy drive.
Well, thanks for asking. And first of all, congratulations on that wonderful Christmas tree that appears behind you. It really helps to put us all in the Christmas spirit. But
Right? Yeah.
speaking of the Christmas spirit, we definitely saw that this year for the toy drive, the annual North Shore Holiday Toy Drive, where I partner with North Shore 104.9, and we travel all throughout the region. And this year, Heather, we went from having our usual about 9 stops to doing about 14. And so we were all over the place. And really the wonderful thing about the toy drive is it gets us to be in individual communities. We don't sit at the radio station and have people come to us. We go to them. And unfortunately this year, again, like last year, we couldn't have a lot of our student performers and our student musicians, but we still needed to go forward because we still want to fill a need. And it was once again just a wonderful experience. And we did get some professional musicians to come and help us out. And we exceeded our expectations. We raised somewhere in the vicinity of $34,000 in cash and gift cards and just truckloads of toys. And it is just the most inspiring thing to see how generous people in our region are and how they come out from folks that literally, without exaggeration, brought a truckload, a U-Haul truckload of toys, as they often do, to Woodman's in Essex, to folks that provided, huge amounts of money through checks. But also, the special thing, Heather, it's the person that walks through the door and they just went out and they bought a toy and they want to make a child's Christmas and holiday season special, and they put it in the box. And I can't tell you how special that whole experience is for us to see it happening.
Yeah. Well, we talk about this all the time, how generous this community is. Like really exceptionally so. And you're seeing it firsthand. And I think, as I understand it, each community you go to, the toys that you and the gift cards and the donations that you are receiving go to that town, right?
That's right. The toy drive is not an entity unto itself. What we do is support whatever charity is in the community, and we have a number of different partner charities. So on Cape Ann, during COVID-19, Pathways for Children, Wellspring House, and Action Incorporated joined forces, and they created something called the Cape Ann Holiday Kids Fund. So in the Cape Ann communities, that is the organization that we are working with, and we were able to provide them again with cash and gift cards and toys. And actually Action Incorporated, as part of that operation, had to rent a truck to be able to continue to pick up the toys and bring them in from so many different partners, like the American Legion, for instance, in Gloucester was doing a collection, the Mass Mutters, just so many different organizations, and everyone rose to the challenge. And I have to tell you what a special time we had in Dark Square, in your hometown of Rockport, where we actually went live outdoors in Dark Square at the Christmas tree. And we had outdoor patio heaters providing heat, and Michelle Brown just had organized everything, and it was just spectacular. And Cape Ann Savings Bank in Gloucester, Woodman's in Essex, just absolutely spectacular. And there's a lot of cynicism out there right now in our environment, and I have to tell you how wonderful it is to see something that is not that is something totally the opposite of that. People saying, we're just going to get together and we're going to help kids. And the toy drive, it went for a whole week. 2 years ago, we did a day. Last year, because of COVID, we had to spread it out. And this year, we spread it out again. We went to a full week. And it is just an amazing experience. And I am so grateful to everyone that makes it happen. The radio station, the folks that come out, the different hosts in the different venues. And, we're already thinking about what are we going to do next year, because we have a lot more folks that want to get involved. And as long as it helps kids, we're happy to involve them.
Yeah. Well, joy is contagious, right? So it sounds like you got a lot of gift out of this too. Right?
There's no question.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. And there are just so many stories that I could tell about, folks coming out and the reason they bring us toys. So for instance, the couple in Essex that brings the toys to Woodman's, they're actually from Newbury. but they bring the toys because they want them to go on Cape Ann, because the aunt of the couple, of the wife, used to teach school in Gloucester. And when she passed away, they wanted to create a legacy and a way to remember her. And so they bring these toys every year, and they start to go buy toys the day after Christmas, and they accumulate them for the entire year.
That is wonderful. Well, let's catch up on some legislation. I think there's a very serious compromise piece of legislation that just passed. Do you want to tell us about that?
There is, and I'm pleased to tell you, and I just double checked just before we went on the air to make sure that this was the case, but we have been dealing with a piece of legislation that has to do with protecting the animal welfare of hens and of pigs and chickens. And that bill was passed actually by the voters in 2019. And it had to do with making sure that in the case of chickens, that there was enough space for them to be able to move around and turn around in the cages where they are kept. And the law affects, the proposed law affects not only the chickens that are in Massachusetts, but also wherever the chickens are being raised that we're getting the eggs from. And so this is a law, again, that was passed in 2019 that affects every egg coming into Massachusetts. And over time, since the law was passed, we realized that that doesn't necessarily comport with modern concepts or newer concepts of animal welfare and the way that chickens are raised. And so rather than looking at only the dimensional requirements in terms of square footage, the newer concept allows vertical space as well, so that the chickens can roost. And so allowing for that is something that we had to do to be able to promote animal welfare and to meet with modern practices of raising chickens and producing eggs. And the law would go into effect, excuse me, its provisions on January 1st. So if we didn't make that change, we would have had a very, very serious problem, because eggs coming into Massachusetts wouldn't be compliant. Most of the eggs being grown in Massachusetts wouldn't be compliant. And there was also an issue with pork and other kinds of products coming from pigs. And so there was an agreement among the animal welfare advocates and the farming community and the food producers and the food distributors that we had to make a change. But as so often happens,
across the board, the people even who had put up this legislation agree this change has to happen.
Absolutely, nearly unanimous. There were still some outliers, but the main stakeholders agreed that we should do this, but we had to do it before January 1st. Now, as often happens, the House passed a different version of the bill than the Senate. And as we've talked about, that requires a conference committee of 3 members of the Senate and 3 members of the House to reconcile those differences. And I was pleased to be a member of that conference committee. And we've been working for a long time to try to reach a compromise. And in fact, this weekend was fairly busy with phone calls and texts going back and forth and discussions. And I'm pleased to report that we did reach a compromise, that we did file a conference committee report, and that today the House and the Senate adopted that conference committee report. And what I was just checking on is to make sure that the bill is now headed to the governor's desk. So hopefully the governor will sign it. I'm going to talk with him this afternoon about that. And we will have a situation where A, we'll be protecting animal welfare, but B, we'll be making sure that egg products are available. And we did delay the requirements of the bill for the pork products to go to August to allow folks to come up to speed with that. But eventually that will be the case too. And this is a win all the way around. And it really took a lot of collaboration. Again, the kind of collaboration we don't often see may be reported, but I think it's important to tell you about it.
Definitely. So I have one question. It sounds as if the law that was passed in 2019 was really super restrictive in terms of producers, and that's what you needed to change. So how restrictive is the new piece of legislation in terms of eggs coming into the state? Do you want to just give us a little hint of what that looks like?
So it's a great question, and let me answer it directly, and then I want to offer something else. So the eggs coming into the state must comply still with the provisions of the law as we have modified it. And again, I'm making an assumption here that Governor Baker is going to sign the changes. I believe he will. But the the eggs coming in from other states will still have to comply. And so, for instance, we've been hearing from a lot of the producers around the country who've been calling from the major food producers, names you would recognize, saying we need to make sure we get this in place, and we need to know it's going to be in place so we can make sure that we comply with it. And the thing that I wanted to add is we've heard a lot from organizations like the Greater Boston Food Bank, who have indicated just how important eggs are for their consumers. And so if we weren't able to ensure the supply of them, it would be a major problem, not only for the average consumer, but also for the folks that depend on the food banks and places like the Open Door Food Pantry on Cape Ann. So this has been a really important task. I wish we would have accomplished getting it reconciled sooner. We didn't, but now it's on the governor's desk. And again, hopefully the changes will be in effect. And just one more thought. In 2019, the law that was passed by the voters reflected the wisdom of the time. And so the notion of having more vertical space for the chickens was not really something that folks were thinking about at that time. But since then, the industry and the animal welfare advocates had worked to evolve a system that's better for the animals and the birds, and certainly better for consumers.
Well, thank you. So let's talk about state revenues. How are they looking, and what's the forecast there?
Well, you know, that too is a great question, because it's part of the story that we've been seeing of really robust state revenues. So we've talked about the so-called ARPA bill that the legislature did, where we took about $2.5 billion of money that had come from the undiscretionary grant of money that we were given by the federal government, and we took most of the surplus from the prior fiscal year to create a bill of about $4 billion. And a lot of that money is going to find its way to Cape Ann. But now we think, okay, what does the future look like? Are we going to see another opportunity like that? Because the one that we just had with the ARPA bill was so extraordinary. And the answer is, and we just checked with Department of Revenue, but as of right now, we are running for the month of November, which is the latest month that we have numbers for. We are $914 million ahead of our benchmark. So we're running year to date almost $1 billion above our benchmark. Now,
what's happening in the Massachusetts economy, do you think?
Well, it's very robust. And what's interesting about it is that we continue to hear from employers who are having a hard time finding employees. So you would think that might be having a chilling effect on the economy, but it really isn't. There was a lot of pent-up demand during the pandemic, a lot of money being spent on things like now on home improvement and building supplies and other things. But what we're also seeing is a very robust security situation where folks in the stock market are realizing large capital gains. There's a lot of trading going on for whatever reason, and that in part is what's driving it. But I'm not sure that anyone has a complete answer to why this is happening. But we're on track to potentially have a $4 billion surplus in the current fiscal year. And that admits to the possibility that we may be able to do another bill of the size and scope, maybe even a little bit larger, of the one that we just did. So in the new year, remembering that formal sessions will begin the first week in January, and they'll end the last week in July, we will likely have the opportunity to spend some more of that ARPA money. We have about half of it left, or about $2.5 billion. And some of what we anticipate will be a surplus, because the fiscal year ends on July 1. And so we won't have a lot of time to close the books and figure out how much money we have. If we have a surplus, and I certainly hope we will for the current fiscal year, but we will have some sense of how much we can spend, and maybe we'll be seeing another bill. And so one thing we're doing is asking cities and towns, again, to remind us of what projects they have that are important, that might be eligible, and to ask folks what they think might be good subjects for this kind of spending. And the last ARPA bill that we did reflected a lot of that information and a lot of input from folks across a spectrum of issues. And we responded to a lot of those issues. And right now it looks like we may have the chance to do so again, particularly if these numbers continue to trend upward.
Well, That brings me to a very specific question. In the Gloucester Times this week, there was an article about the Rockport DPW project. And the voters had voted to allocate $12 million to that project, to building a new building that apparently we really desperately need that. And now with the cost of building going up so much, we're still $3 to $4 million short. Is there state money, ARPA money available for, because the DPW feels sort of in a jam, and the town does?
No, it's a situation that I've been watching with a lot of concern, and the selectmen have reached out, as well as the town administrator, to talk about this gap that exists. And I know that they've worked hard to try to reduce the gap, but even with all of that effort, we still have a substantial difference between the funds that are available and the cost of the modified plans of the building. So I can't give you a definitive answer except to say we are going to be meeting with them, Representative Ferrante and I, and we're going to talk more about it. But there is the possibility that we might be able to direct ARPA funds in that direction. But it also points up something else, and that is that you can hear one of my ringtones on the phone. I do not have livestock here at the State House.
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the things that's been lacking in Massachusetts for a long time is a way to help municipalities fund municipal buildings, police stations, fire stations, DPW buildings, particularly ones that are not libraries or schools. We have programs for those two kinds of buildings. We do not have an established program for the other kinds. So Heather, in the new year, you may hear more about that. We may want to talk about this subject
I'm writing that down.
in the first week of the new year, because it is something that we need to address. And Rockport is not the only community that is struggling with this, particularly with communities that are smaller, let's say less than 20,000 people, that have large capital needs but don't have a large tax base to be able to spread that cost over. And so we're looking very hard at this. Again, there is no specific program right now in the ARPA legislation or in the ARPA funding, at least as far as the state is concerned. So we're talking with our federal colleagues. We're also looking at some other things. But again, I think early in the new year, you and I should revisit this subject.
I have an asterisk next to that. Do you have time for one more question? I know
I do.
Okay. Testing, COVID testing. I know the National Guard has arrived in Gloucester with boxes of kits. Are we going to see more at-home tests? Because it seems really important.
We definitely are. And right now, the tests that are being provided by state government are intended for specific targeted populations. But I've been receiving calls in my office from public officials and from individuals asking about the scalability of that effort. In other words, can we get more tests into the hands of consumers that are not part of a targeted population? And I would predict that you are going to see more tests flowing. And I think one of the things that's been a significant change is the ability to do a home test, which in most cases, my understanding, yields a result in about 15 minutes. That's not something that we had, and at least not reliably had, before. So now that we have that as a tool, my prediction is you're going to see them become much more available. You can buy them now at some of the retail outlets on Cape Ann, but my thought is you may see a larger state effort to help them get into the hands of folks. And they're a really important tool. And I do want to emphasize something that the governor has stated time and again, and that is if you're planning on going to a gathering and you have the ability to, it's a good idea to do the test before you go to the gathering rather than after you've left it, to see and make sure that you're not posing a threat when you're getting together with a group of people. Thanks again to you in 1623 Studios, and thanks to everyone out there. And let's hope not only that we all have a Merry Christmas, but we do everything we need to keep each other safe and try to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. And let's look forward to a new year that is healthy and happy and prosperous, and one in which we continue to find strength from helping each other, because that strength on Cape Ann is very, very prevalent.
Thank you. Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.